Good afternoon. Welcome to Cold Springs. Today is Wednesday, December the 10th, 2025, and this is our series Life Lessons. And our life lesson today comes from two groups of people that are associated both with the Christmas story and with Jesus' public ministry. And we're calling those two groups of people the villagers and the temple goers. In the case of the villagers, the first reference would be to the Christmas story, the people in the village of Bethlehem. They know that it's the ancestral home of King David, the second king of Israel. They know that they're in the tribal territory of Judah. They know with both head and heart knowledge, based on their scriptures, that the promised Messiah is supposed to come from their tribe of Judah, and specifically from their family line of descended from King David. And they know from the various prophecies of the Old Testament that the time is about right for the Messiah to appear. There's a general expectation. You probably hear that a lot when you're at church services or participating in Bible studies and they're talking about the Christmas story and they're talking about the events of Easter, that it was the general time frame when people were eagerly anticipating God's promised Messiah coming. They had a lot of biblical reasons for that, and that's a study that we'll do all by itself someday on why they thought the time was right, because the Bible gave them some clear evidence of it's about the right time for these things to happen. But for the sake of this short podcast, let's just leave it at there's a general air of expectation that it won't be long now until God fulfills His word. So with that as the backdrop, you would think that when the shepherds came and found the Christ child exactly as the angel had told them, lying in a manger in a place that normally was used for animals, and the shepherds began praising God and telling everybody in the village that it would have gotten people's attention. But sometimes people can be there, they can be part of an event and completely miss the significance of the event. Not only just when things are happening, but years later when they're reflecting back on their life and remembering the things that have happened in their local community, in their personal lives, and in the world. How many of them maybe reflected on it, and we don't have a record in the Bible about how many did or didn't eventually come to faith in Jesus as the Messiah. But we know this. The shepherds were making it known in the area where Jesus was born that they had been visited by the angels and that they had found that child that was promised in the scriptures as being the Messiah. How many of them grew up, continued their lives, and ever came to faith in Jesus? At the temple, we know that when the wise men show up announcing that they have come from the far, far east, from either Babylon or Persia, a distance of at least 700 to 1,200 miles. And they've brought these gifts, and they've come because they want to worship a Jewish king, because they've seen something in the skies, the same skies that everybody else saw, that's led them to know that that king of the Jews has been born, and they've come to Jerusalem because they want to worship him. They saw the same thing everybody else saw at night. The difference was they knew how to put the pieces of the puzzle together. They knew what it meant. They knew what they were seeing in the skies was letting them know God is acting. God had promised that there would be a star rising out of Jesse. Jesse is the father of King David, for whom the village of Bethlehem was hometown, as it was for Jesus. They knew their scriptures. these wise men announce that they've seen in the skies the clues that let them know that the King of the Jews has been born. And yet, even when they're asked the important question by Herod, where is this king supposed to be born? And they go diving through their Bibles and they find the prophecy in the scroll of Malachi that it's Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is literally down the street. They can see the village of Bethlehem from the temple. They've heard the news. They've had it reinforced by these visitors who've come thousands of miles to worship this new king. And they're not willing to take a couple of hours to go 5 miles down the road and find out whether or not they find this child too, whether or not this is all true, and come back and try to look in their Bibles and make sense out of it. There were people who were there at the temple when Joseph and Mary show up when Jesus is 40 days old, and they've got to fulfill the law. They have to show up at the temple and present him. He's a firstborn male that opens the womb. Joseph's got to pay the redemption price that the law required. They're there to have his name and his place of birth and his family tree enrolled in the census records. They're obeying the law. And the people who are taking that information down have been tipped off by the wise men, and it's not unreasonable to think that they've also been tipped off by at least some of the shepherds. Because you see, those sheep that were being offered as sacrifices at the temple were largely being raised in Bethlehem by the shepherds and then brought to Jerusalem, a short 5-mile distance away, so that when people came from the farthest part of the Holy Land and they didn't have an animal to bring with them, but they were planning on purchasing one, or if something was found defective in their animal and they needed to purchase a new one, there would be sheep readily available to help people fulfill the law. There had to be lots of interactions between various members of the Levites and the priestly clans with the shepherds who were taking care of the sheep that were used for the sacrificial system. So they had a lot of evidence to let them know, you need to be paying attention. God's at work. Something's happening here. But yet when Simeon and Anna, the two well-respected senior citizens, are at the temple that same day, and they see Joseph and Mary bringing that baby in, and they start to proclaim the good news from right there in the court of the women. How do we know it's the court of the women? Because Mary and Anna are both there, and that's the only place they can be. They can't go into the court of the men, and they certainly can't go into the court of the priest. They can only be in the outer courtyard where both men and women could gather. And they're telling everybody who's come to worship the good news. And people don't know what to make of it. Or maybe they do like Mary, they hide these things in their heart. And then you fast forward a little over 3 decades. And Jesus is going about doing his public ministry. And a lot of the time he's up in the area in and around the Galilee, but there are times when he's down in Jerusalem. And he's answering people's questions. And he's healing people. And he's teaching and he's correcting misunderstandings about the scripture. Lots of people had lots of reason to stop and consider, what's God doing here? And for the answers, they just needed to go to their Bibles. And yes, their Bible only included the Old Testament, but there was enough in the Old Testament to let them know that Jesus qualifies. They know where he was born. They know what family lineage he's from. It's not a matter of some couple who just happens to be from, say, the tribe of Asher or Naphtali or one of the other tribes happened to be in the area when the lady gave birth to the baby. No, he's a descendant of King here, raising people from the dead. They have all kinds of evidence piling on top of each other. Evidence that Jesus is this person and that it is the right time for a Messiah to be showing up. Some people put their faith and trust in Jesus. Many others, including people who really should have known better, like the priest and their cousins, the Levites, and a lot of the members of the Sanhedrin. Remember that Sanhedrin group, which was from people from all the different tribes. The court of 70 people that helped decide religious law. When the time came for the high priest and his crowd to want to quietly arrest Jesus and get Rome to agree to put him to death before the people could know anything about it lest they rise up against them, that Sanhedrin group conveniently forgot to invite two people, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, to that nighttime trial that they were putting on, where they were doing a dark deed and they wanted to do it in darkness under the cover of night, when people would be at home sleeping in their beds and not paying attention to what was about to unfold. We know from the Gospels that a lot of people became believers in Jesus after his resurrection, after his ascension back to heaven. We can hope to meet some of those people who at first didn't see what was going on literally right under their noses, right before their very eyes, but maybe reflecting on it years later realized, oh, this is what the scripture said. This is what I saw or heard Jesus say and do. Hopefully they made the right decision. And they're a life lesson for you and me, because here we are, alive in the 21st century AD, with both Old and New Testament. In fact, most of us have the privilege of being able to have the Bible in any number of English translations that we want, to compare notes on how the translators took certain words in Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic and tried to translate them into our language in a way that we could understand the Gospels. And we have to decide, what are we going to do with Jesus? Are we seeing God at work in our day and time, in our lives, in the situation of the world? Are we seeing biblically prophesied events coming into place? And how do we know if a prophecy has been fulfilled or not? Because it has to be an exact match, not a near match, an exact match. Are we seeing what God is doing? You see, that's the problem that the villagers had. That's the problem that the people going to the temple had. They were there. They were trying to do their best to worship God. But were they seeing what God was actually doing? And so here in the 21st century, are you seeing what God is doing in your life? Are you seeing his hand at work? Are you worshiping God when you don't understand? Are you worshiping God and seeing God's hand working in your life, even when things are going badly, when things don't turn out the way you expected or hoped or dreamed they would? And are you, most importantly, trusting God with the future? Those villagers who heard from the shepherds may have dismissed them because, after all, they're shepherds. Kind of the low-class job. The kind of job that only the poorest and most uneducated would have. But what were those shepherds doing? They were sharing their real lived experience. They were out there tending sheep, a job that was important and needed to be done, but it wasn't exactly a highly respected profession. And they got a visit from an angel. And then they saw a multitude of the heavenly host. And they were obedient. They saw, they heard, and they responded. The question for today for you and me is, and a life lesson for us is, you've heard the gospel. You've heard it taught in Sunday school classes or in other Bible studies that you've attended. You've heard it proclaimed from pulpits in church services that you've attended. You've seen people living their lives for God in your family and among your community members. But are you really seeing what they're seeing? Or are you just sort of there for the historical events without being able to put it into the right context. You need to learn to see with the eyes of the shepherds, to see with the eyes of the Simeons and Annas of this world, with the Joseph of Arimathea and the Nicodemuses, who didn't necessarily see it first, but came to believe in who Jesus was. You need to see Christ at Christmas. Thanks for